During training, the Army told every M60 gunner the same thing. You have 7 seconds to live. Not as a metaphor, as a calculation. 7 seconds from the moment you open fire until the enemy locates your position and kills you. The M60 machine gun weighed 23 pounds. Its slower rate of fire, 550 rounds per minute, a heavy, distinctive rhythm, gave it away every time. Everyone on the battlefield could hear it. Everyone knew where it was. The North Vietnamese Army had a standing order. Kill the officers. Kill the radio operators. Kill the M60 gunner. In that order. Sometimes simultaneously. The men who carried the M60 music into the Drang Valley in November of 1965 knew all of this. They carried it anyway. They carried it because someone had to. Because without it, the battalion died. This is not a story about a weapon. It is a story about the men assigned to it. About what it cost them to keep firing when every instinct said stop. About a specialist named Willard Parrish who expended every round he had and drew his pistol to fight men 20 yards away and lived with more than 100 enemy dead around his position when it was over. About an M60 gunner whose face caught fire and whose comrades pried burning white phosphorus from his skin with bayonets. About what it meant to be the most valuable and most hunted man in a platoon of 40 men fighting 3 enemy battalions in a clearing the size of a football field. The M60 was called the Pig. The men who carried it were called Pig Men. Neither name was an insult. Both were accurate. The weapon itself was a product of the Korean War lessons and German wartime engineering. Specifically the MG42, whose belt-fed quick-change barrel concept the Army reverse-engineered into something American factories could produce. The M60 fired the 7.62 by 51 mm NATO round from a disintegrating linked belt. Cyclic rate, 550 rounds per minute. Effective range on area targets, 1800 m. Maximum effective range on a point target, 1100 m. Muzzle velocity, 2,800 feet per second. Standard combat load, 200 rounds in a 100-round belt coiled in a metal ammunition box, plus a second box, plus whatever the gunner could beg, borrow, or demand from the men around him. Because every rifleman in the platoon carried 200 rounds of linked 7.62 for the M60 gunner. Not for themselves. Music for the Pig. That ammo weighed 13 pounds per 200 rounds. 400 rounds. 26 additional pounds on top of the rifleman's own load of 80 to 110 pounds. In 90 degrees heat. In 90% humidity. Through elephant grass that sliced exposed skin like paper cuts and triple canopy jungle that turned midday into permanent twilight. The entire platoon carried the machine gunner's ammunition. Because without that ammunition, the platoon had no answer for what the North Vietnamese Army was about to do to them. The assistant gunner carried a spare barrel. The barrel change was the M60's critical vulnerability and its critical advantage. After 200 to 300 rounds of sustained fire, the barrel went red hot. You could watch it glow in low light. If you kept firing, the barrel warped. Rounds cooked off in the chamber. The gun became a liability. You changed the barrel. You did this with an asbestos mitten. Universally hated. Universally issued. Universally carried. Gripping the carrying handle. Pulling the barrel forward. Locking the new one in place. In theory, a barrel change took 4 to 6 seconds. In a firefight with the enemy 20 yards away and the barrel glowing cherry red, music, 4 to 6 seconds was a long time. The M60 gunner at Drang was expected to establish a position, create interlocking fields of fire with the other M60 crew in the platoon, maintain suppression during assaults, and survive. The last item was the most difficult. 2 M60 crews per platoon. 6 per company, 12 per battalion. Music, every one of them was a priority target. Type the number 5 in the comments right now if you are still here. LZ X-ray. November 14th, 1965. 10:48 in the morning. The first helicopters descended into a clearing at the base of the Chu Pong Massif in the Drang Valley. Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore was on the lead ship. His battalion, the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, 1st Air Cavalry Division, was landing in lifts. The helicopters could carry 8 to 10 men at a time. They had to fly the 34-mile round trip to the staging area at Play Me and back. 8 to 10 men per load, over and over. While the men already on the ground held the clearing against whatever was waiting in the tree line. What was waiting was 3 North Vietnamese Army battalions. Roughly 1,600 soldiers staging in the mountain above the clearing preparing to move to the valley floor for an attack on the Special Forces camp at Plamy. Moore had chosen this landing zone deliberately, close to the suspected enemy concentration because he wanted to find the NVA before they found him. He found them in the first hour. Contact at 12:15. Bravo Company sent a patrol toward the base of the mountain. The patrol encountered NVA soldiers a few hundred meters from the clearing's edge. The NVA doctrine was to close immediately. Grab them by the belt buckle. Get inside the range where American artillery and air power became as dangerous to the Americans as to the enemy. By early afternoon, fighting at X-ray was ranging from 200 yards down to arm's length. Men were shooting each other from distances they could have thrown a baseball. The M60 crews established their positions around the perimeter. Moore's tactical guidance on the machine guns was specific. Hold fire during night probes. The NVA sent scouts ahead of their assaults specifically to locate the heavy weapons by their muzzle flash and sound. An M60 that revealed itself too early was an M60 that would be the focus of the next assault. So the gunners lay in their foxholes in the dark listening to NVA soldiers moving through the grass yards away and did not fire. Think about what that required. You are 22 years old. You are lying in a hole in the ground in the Drang Valley in Vietnam, and you can hear the enemy moving outside the perimeter. You are holding a 23 pounds weapon capable of putting 550 rounds per minute into whatever is in front of it. And you are not firing, because firing will mark your position. Because if you fire before Moore's order, the NVA will know where you are. And the first thing they will do when the assault comes is kill you. So you listen. You wait. You control your breathing. You do not fire. The men who could do this were the men the battalion needed. During the Day 2 morning assault, the crisis of the battle, the NVA hit Charlie Company's sector with a three-sided attack just before dawn. Within the first minutes, Charlie Company lost officers, then lost more officers. By the time the assault was at its worst, Charlie Company had lost all 6 of its officers. NCOs were holding the line. NVA soldiers penetrated the perimeter in several places. They reached the battalion command post. Moore was directing the defense personally. Specialist Willard Parrish held a position on Charlie Company's lines with his M60. What followed was documented in his Silver Star citation and in subsequent accounts from survivors. During the assault, Parrish maintained fire on the advancing NVA, burning through his ammunition as the enemy closed the distance. He expended his 200-round belt. He expended his second box. He called for more. There was no more. He fired the last of what his assistant gunner had. He fired the last of the linked rounds the riflemen around him had been carrying all day. His M60 was empty. The NVA were 20 yards away. Parrish drew his .45 caliber pistol. A .45 automatic is not a machine gun. It holds 7 rounds in the magazine, plus 1 in the chamber. 8 shots against NVA soldiers 20 yards away in a dawn assault. Willard Parrish fired his pistol at the advancing enemy and kept firing until the assault broke. When they counted the dead around his position after the battle, more than 100 NVA soldiers lay in the grass in front of the place where Parrish had been. Some accounts say the number was closer to 150. The M60 had done most of it. The .45 had done the rest. Parrish received the Silver Star. He had been 19 years old when he deployed. The lost platoon was a different kind of nightmare. 2nd Platoon, Bravo Company, pushed into the trees pursuing retreating NVA in the early afternoon of November 14th. Lieutenant Henry Herrick led them. The platoon got cut off. NVA units moved around their flanks and sealed the gap between the platoon and the perimeter. Herrick was hit within 25 minutes. A burst of AK fire entering his hip and exiting his shoulder. The radio operator was hit. The forward observer was hit. The NVA had targeted the command group simultaneously. Sergeant Ernie Savage took command. He was a buck sergeant, E5, 23 years old, from Alabama. He grabbed the radio and began directing the defense of 29 men, 9 already dead, 13 wounded, in a position about the size of a backyard. The M60 crews on the knoll were among the first the NVA targeted. One crew was wiped out early. Their gun was captured. The NVA took an American M60 machine gun and turned it toward the American perimeter. The remaining crew fought through the afternoon, into the night, and into the following day. By evening, one M60 crew was left functional on the knoll. Their ammunition situation was critical. Every wounded man who could reach his ammunition pouches, was passing rounds forward. Savage was calling artillery so close to his own position that the blast concussions pushed through the air. At just before midnight, the NVA attacked the knoll. Savage directed artillery. The attack broke. At 3:15 in the morning, preceded by bugles from the mountain above, a sound that veterans of the battle described as the most chilling thing they heard in Vietnam, the NVA attacked again. Savage directed artillery again. The attack broke. At 4:30, a third attack, same response. 3 assaults. 3 times the artillery came in practically on top of the platoon. 3 times the NVA broke off. When relief reached the lost platoon at 3:30 in the afternoon on November 15th, 26 hours after they were cut off, Savage had 20 men still alive. Some were wounded. All were exhausted beyond description. Moore's assessment of the lost platoon's survival, and specifically of Savage's management of ammunition, when they came out, they had ammo left over. Now, that's discipline. He meant it as the highest possible praise. There was a moment in the lost platoon's ordeal involving an M60 gunner that does not appear in the Silver Star citations. Sergeant Wayne Anderson, one of the gun crews on the knoll, was hit by a white phosphorus grenade. White phosphorus, WP, Willie Pete, burns at approximately 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It does not stop burning when exposed to air. It burns through skin, through tissue, and if it reaches bone, it burns through bone. The only way to stop it is to cut off the oxygen, pack the wound, smother the burning fragment, remove it from contact with air. Anderson's face caught fire. 2 men from the platoon knocked him down and used their bayonets to pry burning fragments of white phosphorus from his face. They worked by feel and poor light, pulling burning material off a man's skin with the tips of bayonets while the enemy was outside the perimeter and the artillery was coming in close. Anderson survived. He carried the scars the rest of his life. The M60 that caused the white phosphorus wound was an American weapon. WP grenades were American munitions. The specific chain of events that put burning phosphorus on an American soldier's face in the Drang Valley in November of 1965 is not fully reconstructed in the available sources. What is reconstructed is what came after. Bayonets on a man's face. 2 soldiers doing the only thing that could be done. The napalm incident on day 2 was a different category of horror, and it included a medic running toward fire. 2 F-100 Super Sabres dropped napalm on November 15th. The canisters came in wrong. Galloway, the UPI reporter, watched them tumbling through the air and understood before they hit what was about to happen. Private First Class Jimmy Nakayama and Specialist James Clark were engulfed. Their hair burned off instantly. Their clothing incinerated. Sergeant Keaton reached them and injected both men with morphine. The morphine gave little relief against napalm burns of that severity. A medic ran toward the burning soldiers to help. An NVA sniper shot him through the head. He died before he reached them. Galloway reached Nakayama and dragged him to the aid station. Nakayama died 2 days later, the same day his wife gave birth to their first child. Moore called the napalm pilots off, screamed it into the radio, and then told his forward air controller to keep bringing in airstrikes anyway, because the airstrikes were the only thing keeping the assault from overrunning the perimeter. You absorb the cost of the error and keep going because the alternative is worse. LZ Albany was different. Albany was not a defensive battle. Albany was a slaughter. The 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry had been at X-ray. They had not slept in 36 to 48 hours. They were carrying 80 to 110 pounds in heat that reached the upper 80s and humidity that sat on your chest like a physical weight. They were marching overland from X-ray to a landing zone called Albany, 550 yards of men in column through chest-high elephant grass. At 1:15 in the afternoon of November 17th, approximately 1,100 NVA soldiers hit the column simultaneously. From the front, from the right flank, from the rear, NVA soldiers ran down the length of the column. They were close enough to touch. Private First Class Jack Smith, Charlie Company, later wrote that he pushed his M16 barrel into an enemy soldier's face and fired. He was not speaking metaphorically. He was describing the distance at which the fighting occurred. The M60 crews in the column were hit in the opening seconds. The NVA understood exactly what they were doing. Kill the machine guns. Kill the radio operators. Kill the officers. And the column becomes individual men fighting individual men in chest-high grass. unable to see more than a few feet in any direction, unable to coordinate, unable to call fire support, because Americans and NVA were intermingled at distances where artillery and air would kill both. A fire support officer circled overhead with access to artillery, gunships, and air support. He could not use any of it. He could not reach anyone on the ground by radio. The RTOs were dead or dying. He had everything the battalion needed and could not get it to them. He watched from the air and could do nothing. The M60 gunners who were still alive and functional at Albany fired until they couldn't. Then they fired more. The M60's distinctive rhythm, that heavy, authoritative thump, thump, thump that every infantry veteran recognizes, the sound that said help is here, the sound that said someone has the heavy gun working, was the sound men moved toward, not away toward. Because an M60 still firing meant the position was still contested. An M60 that went silent meant the position was gone. Charlie Company took 93% casualties at Albany. 45 dead, more than 50 wounded. Of roughly 100 men who walked into that column, fewer than 10 came out uninjured. Every M60 crew in Charlie Company was killed or wounded. The company commander was killed. Every officer was killed. NCOs who were themselves wounded were making decisions that determined whether men lived. Jack Smith hid under dead bodies. He lay still and stopped breathing and willed himself not to shake while an NVA machine gunner set up his weapon on top of him. He heard men pleading in the grass around him. No, 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 please. Followed by bursts of AK fire. The NVA moved through the grass after the initial assault, executing wounded Americans. Smith heard this. He lay still. He survived. 2 wounded men at Albany shot themselves with their own pistols rather than be captured. One man named Schiff, unwounded, pulled the pin on his own grenade. By the time it was over, by the time Captain Myron de Durik's Bravo Company was helicoptered in at 6:45 that evening, veterans of X-ray, who had not slept in days, flying back into combat without hesitation. Albany had taken more than half of all American deaths in the entire 35-day Drang operation. 155 killed or missing, 124 wounded out of 375 men. The entire battalion, what remained of it, fit in 4 2.5-ton trucks when they returned to base camp. The M60 gunners' role in that battle was the same as it had been at X-ray, and the same as it was in every firefight the Army fought in Vietnam. Hold the line. Keep firing. Accept the mathematical truth that 7 seconds is a reasonable estimate of your survival time, and fire anyway. Not because you have decided the math is wrong, because the men around you need the gun working more than they need you to be cautious about it. Every infantry veteran of Vietnam remembers specific sounds the way other people remember songs. The wop 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 of Huey Roeder's Salvation, or the beginning of something worse, depending on the day. The sharp crack of an M16. The deeper bark of an AK-47. The ability to tell friend from foe by sound alone in total darkness. The whistle of incoming mortar rounds in the seconds before impact. NVA bugles in the Drang Valley at 3:15 in the morning coming down from the mountain above the lost platoon and the M60. That slow, authoritative rhythm, 550 rounds per minute, thump, 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 the most reassuring sound on the battlefield when it was yours, and the most terrifying sound when it stopped. Every grunt in every platoon in Vietnam listened for that sound. When it was going, you knew the position was contested. When it stopped, you knew one of 2 things had happened. Either the gun was changing barrels and would be back in 4 to 6 seconds, or the gunner was gone and the position was about to collapse. The men who fired the M60 at Drang were not special operations. They were not elite in the way that designation is now used. They were regular Army infantrymen, many of them draftees, carrying the most dangerous assignment in the platoon because the assignment existed and someone had to fill it. Willard Paris was a specialist, not an officer. Wayne Anderson was a sergeant. The men who died at their guns at Albany were 19 and 22 and 24 years old, carrying 23 pounds of weapon plus the weight of the ammo every rifleman around them also carried, walking into a clearing or a column through elephant grass, knowing that when the first shot was fired, every NVA soldier who heard it would be trying to find them. 7 seconds. That was the calculation. That was what training told them they had. Most of them lasted longer than that. Some of them did not. All of them fired. When the battle was over and the dead were counted and the helicopters had taken out the last of the wounded and the battalion had been extracted and the army had added up the numbers, 79 killed and 121 wounded at X-Ray, 155 killed or missing and 124 wounded at Albany. The generals in Saigon looked at the kill ratios and called it a victory. The M60 gunners did not call it anything. They were already back in the field.